Hey there guys, so the past few months I've been rewatching all the Star Trek movies on Blu-ray, and I thought it was a perfect time to rank all of them. Since I'm a fan of the franchise, I'm currently watching Deep Space Nine at the moment, so I just thought it was a good time because since I love doing ranking videos and Star Trek was kind of next on the list. Let's just quickly go through some ground rules. This is my opinion, film is subjective. Please don't put any nasty comments like, why did you put that at number 4, or why is that so high on your list and stuff like that. Let's get started now. Coming at last place is the one that started it all, Star Trek The Motion Picture, or as I like to call it, The Motionless Picture. It is so boring. It's one of those films in my life that I will probably never watch again because I was falling asleep. It was trying so hard to be like Stanley Kubrick's 2001 Space Odyssey rather than being a Star Trek film. When I was watching the other day on Blu-ray, I went on my phone for like 5 minutes just to check my news feed, and still I was on the same scene. It was just so slow. I give props to the film for like production design and value, but at the end of the day, it is so boring. At number 12 is Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. Now, it's more entertaining than The Motionless Picture, but it's the dumbest Star Trek film by far. William Shatner cannot write or direct to save his life. There's some really lacking effects, some really cringe-worthy jokes, but I will say the film does have some great character moments between Kirk, Spock and McCoy. At number 11 is the crossover movie Star Trek Generations. Now, on paper, this would have been the ultimate Star Trek film. You got the original cast mixing with the Next Generation cast, but really it's just Captain Kirk in like the first 20 minutes of the film and in the last 20 minutes of the film. And I will say William Shatner is the best thing about this film, but he needed a much worthy death. The Nexus plot is boring and at times confusing. This came out months after the Next Generation finale, All Good Things, which is amazing, by the way. You got to check that out. It's one of the best finales in television history. At number 10 is the forgettable Star Trek Insurrection. Now, I don't think I've seen it enough times to put it below the top 10, but considering this was directed by Jonathan Frakes and written by Michael Piller, this should have been at least good. Insurrection feels like a mediocre episode of The Next Generation with a bigger budget. You got space hippies, Picard's one-off love interest, Data dealing with the fundamentals of fun, and the fundamentals of the Prime Directive that really gets so jarring at times. At number 9 is Into Darkness. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with this. As a summer blockbuster, it's great, but as a Star Trek movie, it really doesn't work. It cuts corners in terms of like technology and magic blood. It rehashes stuff from Wrath of Khan, which was really unnecessary. Benedict Cumberbatch is great, but they could have made a more original story with him, and not all the main characters had their moment to shine compared to the other two movies. At number 8 is the best of the bad bunch, Star Trek Nemesis. Now, a lot of people would say this is one of the worst Star Trek films because it ended the Next Generation on a low point. It kind of killed the franchise for a while. To me, this was like the first Star Trek film I saw in theatres, and this was a time when 8-year-olds didn't know what Star Trek was. So I have a lot of nostalgia for this. I think it's a lot smarter than some of my weaker Star Trek films. I think it has a better pacing. It has some great ideas, just poorly executed, but I think the characters were really nicely sent off in this. At number 7 is The Search for Spock. Now, I know a lot of people would put this in their top 5. It's a solid movie, but it's not amazing. It has its flaws. The one thing that really gets on my nerves is when Kirk's son gets killed, and there's no really emotional weight to it. But the film really captures the loyalty, the love, the friendship of this crew and would do anything to bring back Spock. It's a depressing movie, really. I mean, they're fugitives to the Federation, Kirk's son gets killed, the Enterprise blows up, but at the end of the movie, it just ends on such a happy note when Spock comes back. At number 6 is the only good Next Generation movie, and that's The First Contact. I would have put this in my top 5, but I hate the idea of a Borg queen. But apart from that, it's fun, it's enjoyable, has great action, great character moments. It's a solid movie. Coming at the top 5 is Star Trek Beyond. Now, out of the 3 J.J. Abrams reboot films, this one feels like the most Star Trek. It's one of the fun Star Trek films. This one had an important responsibility, carry 50 years of Star Trek, and it was handled perfectly. they really found their way with this new type of franchise in this. Every character in this film had their own moment to shine, and it has those tropes that kind of represents the original series or the Next Generation or any other series in particular, and Leonard Nimoy's death was really handled well in this. And number 4 is objectively the greatest Star Trek film, Wrath of Khan. Now the reason why it's not at number 1 to me, because there's other Star Trek films I prefer a little bit more, but you know, Wrath of Khan is probably one of the greatest science fiction films ever made. The beauty about Wrath of Khan is that it's a sequel to an episode of the original series, Space Seed. And thanks to this time jump, like 15 years later, we get to see these characters and what they're reflecting on now, like aging and death, which leads to rich, powerful character moments like Spock's death. And number 3 is the film that brought back the franchise to life, and that's the 2009 reboot. Now you can really learn a lot from this from a filmmaking point of view. J.J. Abrams, who is not a fan of Star Trek, somehow makes a compelling film for Star Trek fans and non-Star Trek fans. This version of Captain Kirk is such a relatable character. They found a great way to tie into the previous canon. Now the reason why it's not at number 1 is that it feels more of a summer blockbuster than a Star Trek film. And number 2 is Star Trek VI: The Undiscovered Country. It's a murder mystery which is exciting, and it ends on the original cast on such a high note. It's got suspense, it's got action, it's dark but you can have fun with it. It was very reminiscent for what was going on at the time, which was the Cold War. So my favourite Star Trek film of all time, and that's Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home, or some people like to call it the one with the whales. Out of all the Star Trek films, this one has such a really odd plot. So the crew go back in time to save some hunchback whales, and somehow it becomes such a fun, amazing Star Trek film. Not just a fun Star Trek film, but a fun movie in general, really. I mean, it doesn't have any action, it's silly, it has that fish out of water comedy, but it's so charming. And they really made the most out of everyone out of the original cast. And if you made this film today's standards, it really wouldn't work. So that's why it's very timeless to me. Star Trek 4 is just really such a good time. And I think it's really very reminiscent to me, really, because I kind of like movies that kind of go back in time or kind of have that fish out of water to really. And Leonard Nimoy did such a great job directing this. I wish he kind of directed other Star Trek films or kind of stayed on to direct other Star Trek episodes in other series. So to me, yes, Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home is my favourite Star Trek film of all time. Thank you so much for watching this video, guys. Go like, share and subscribe. Let me know, what are your favourite Star Trek films? If you could do a rankings, please comment down below. I really like to see it. Go check out my Facebook, my Twitter and my Instagram page. You guys are awesome. I've got your back.